I have fat here or fat here or fat here. I'm going to eliminate carbohydrates completely from my diet.
Every Instagram diva fries her pancakes on coconut oil.
God. Sorry. No.
Why are babies so fat? Their legs are slim, but they have this beer belly. Some people eat a lot and never gain weight, and some of them smell a donut and gain 3 kilograms, so to say. Why is that? What's the reason for that?
Yeah, so the short answer is we don't know. That's the short answer. That's what
the
research.
short answer to everything in
That's
science.
a short. Yeah, otherwise we would have closed that chapter, right? So that's what a lot of people that are interested in metabolism, obesity, metabolic disease, exercise. That's what we're trying to figure out. What is it that varies between individuals that makes it so that your body makes decisions that the other person's body doesn't? And that has to do with not only qualitative but quantitative food intake, for example. Like the decisions that we make that I'm going to eat this food or not, or I'm going to eat this much or not, are very, very individual, and they have to do with a variety of factors. Some of them we understand better, which is, for example, your relationship with food, your emotions, your memories, your experiences, if something is pleasant or not. Other things have to do with your own physiology, your individual physiology. And I don't know how specific you want to go, but it basically has to do with when all the different nutrients come into your body, they are going to basically signal to your body in different ways. And different bodies are equipped with different signaling machineries, let's put it like that. So then the final decision of I am going to store this nutrient, I'm going to use this nutrient, or I'm going to let it go, it's very, very individual. And that is why for the same donut that you were talking about, for one body might make the decision to store the entirety of those calories, another individual might not. Then on top of this, you have metabolic rate of the person, you have the lifestyle of the person, if it is a person that is more physically active, less physically active, and whatnot. But if we are just comparing individuals, let's say with the same level of physical activity and the same metabolic rate, you still have this inter-individual variation about decisions that our bodies make in terms of nutrients. Did that make sense?
There is a question from the audience related to that. So if you could open your phone and I will guide you to the video.
Can your diet influence like how your metabolism works?
Yeah,
or is
exactly.
that something that you're like born with? I'm born with a fast metabolism. I'm born with a slow.
Yes. Definitely. Your diet can definitely affect your metabolism. There are many different levels in that. One of them has to do with just simply the quality of the nutrients that you're taking in. If you're taking more proteins, more fatty acids, or more carbohydrates, your metabolism is going to adjust accordingly. So the body is going to use whatever sources of energy it can. So your metabolism is going to adjust accordingly. The other aspect that we talk a lot about these days has to do with the gut microbiome. Have you heard about that? So basically, all the bacteria, the bugs that live in your gastrointestinal tract that go during meters and meters and meters. And there's a variety of different bugs, and they vary from person to person. They vary from environment to environment. They vary from lifestyle to lifestyle, but they also vary with the foods that you take in. So depending on the diet that you're taking in, you're going to change also the gut microbiome. And why is this important? Because these bacteria themselves, they have the capacity to break down certain compounds, certain nutrients. So in a way, you're already conditioning what will even be absorbed into circulation and then be available for your body to make those decisions of storage, utilization, or just letting go. So the diet, in addition to other factors, can definitely change your metabolism.
So they can eat the food.
It's one of the factors, right? There's factors that are intrinsic to the person, and those have to do with your genetics, basically. There are basically what kind of proteins does your body have. I don't want to go into too much specific, but let's think about receptors that receive signals, proteins that are part of your metabolism. What they are It's part of your genetics. But what you give them in terms of nutrients, that you can play around with the food. So that has to do with you as an individual. Then the other aspect I brought up was the gut microbiome, which is the bacteria that you as an individual have in your gastrointestinal tract. They can already, sometimes they will eat some of the food, sometimes they will change it into something else, sometimes they will make it into something that cannot be absorbed anymore. So they condition what even gets absorbed into circulation and then gets, made available to your body.
So when it comes to fat loss, is like calories in versus calories out the only aspect to take into account, or would any other aspect also be relevant in the context?
It's a really good question. There's a quantitative aspect of metabolism and weight loss, which indeed, if you take it to the extreme, calories in and calories out is a lot. So if you, let's say, if one person is given all the food in the world, and if you eat all of that food, you will put on weight. That's for sure. If a person is taking or not given any food, if you really reduce that, you will lose weight. But for most cases, for most humans, most situations, we don't go to these extremes, right? You are a little bit more in the middle, where you continue to eat, but you make a little bit of caloric restriction, or you eat more if you want to put on weight. We always talk about losing weight, but some people want to put on weight. So there, you're a little bit in the middle. And that's where the individual physiology comes in, because remember what I just said, nutrients have a caloric value, your fatty acids, which is the fats, and your carbohydrates, which is the sugars, and your proteins, they have a caloric value. That means that you use them to produce energy, to move, to express yourself, to think, right? But they are also signals. And this is one of the messages that whenever I'm teaching about these subjects, I always try to convey this in the strongest possible way. All of these nutrients, they are also important signals to your physiology. So they are not only used by the body to build more muscle or to get energy. They are also signals. They signal to your immune system, to your brain, to your liver, to your heart. And those signals, we go back to the first point, they are interpreted by different bodies in a different way. And that is the reason why for certain people, the same reduction in calories might be more efficient in weight loss than for other people. See what I mean? Thinking in the middle. If you go to extremes, we all tend to behave more or less the same, But if you stay in a more rational, which is the more appropriate dietary adjustment, either for weight loss or weight gain, then there's a lot of variability, because your body might make decisions that are slightly different because of your genetics or your gut microbiome. See what I mean?
What about the hormones? They say that if your hormones are out of order, you will not lose weight, or you can even put on weight.
Yeah, absolutely. Certain hormones.
Being on calorie restrictive.
Absolutely. Certain hormones, like sex hormones, like thyroid hormone, they are very, very strong dictators of your metabolism. So for example, thyroid hormone, which is produced by the thyroid gland that sits around here, if you have high levels of thyroid hormone, that is a very strong positive signal for accelerate metabolism. So people that have hyperthyroidism, they usually tend to be slender and taller, and for them it's harder to put on muscle mass because your metabolism is just going. So even if you eat more, if your hormonal status, and I'm just giving one example of one hormone, is telling your body just go, accelerate, the energy that you take in is going to be spent, so you don't have a chance to store it. And there are also people that have hypothyroidism, which is of course the contrary example. Then it's easier or more difficult to lose weight. There's a lot of factors, and I know it's annoying when somebody asks a question and we say, well, it depends. But the reality is that it depends.
Why does it become more difficult to put off weight as we grow older?
It's another good question. So one of the things that happens is that your metabolic rate starts reducing as soon as you're born, or right after you're born. So that metabolic rate, to explain it in simple terms, is imagine that all the cells in your body, they are active all the time, right? There's all kinds of chemical reactions going on in your body to sustain life. Just that is what we call basal metabolic rate. So it's basically the sum of all the chemical reactions that must happen so that your body is alive. So for that to happen, right, you need a certain amount of nutrients to come in just to maintain that. that BMR, basal metabolic rate, is really, really high when you're born because you're building tissues, you're growing. So it's very, very high. And then it starts decreasing. And about the age of, let's say, 25 years old, it goes decreases very, very fast. And then when you 20, 25, it reaches a plateau, but it continues to decrease. So that is one of the reasons that the older you are, the slower your basal metabolic rate is. There are other also changes in hormones that you talked about. For example, around the age, this is more evident for women, but also for men, in premenopausal women, that's around the age where people start putting on more weight. And that has to do with changes in the hormones that we were talking about. But one very important aspect on top of all of this that I think people forget often is lifestyle. The older you get, the more likely it is that you start adopting more sedentary behaviors and have a less active lifestyle. This is, of course, not true for everybody. And there's a good thing about it. But in addition to your basal metabolic rate reducing, in addition to hormonal changes, the fact is that the older you get, because of all reasons that have to do with lifestyle, with family life, with your job, we tend to adopt more sedentary lifestyle. So that means that your energy expenditure also goes down. The good thing about this is that that is what you can change very easily. See what I mean? Basal metabolic rate is going to go down. Your hormonal changes are going to happen, but you are in control of your physical activity and exercise. So you can play with that to counteract any possibility of weight gain around that age. In addition to all the reasons that we still don't know, which is more related to individual genetics, things that we are now starting to understand what are the pieces of the puzzle that are important for all of these decisions of use the energy, store the energy, or let it go.
Maybe it's a silly question, but if the younger you are, the higher your metabolic rate is, why are babies so fat?
Well, yeah, I mean, so it's another thing to do, which is body composition, right? So we have different body composition for the same weight, that during the times that you are very small, you need to have a better insulation. So it is advantageous evolutionarily to have a little bit of a subcutaneous fat, which is what you're referring to. It has to do with the surface to body ratio that in small mammals in general you lose heat more easy. So that is one advantage. The other thing is we nowadays think of situations where babies do not go through, or their mothers, through periods of food scarcity or starvation. But evolutionarily, the more reserves you have, the more likely you are to survive if your mother cannot feed you, right? So there's an advantage for babies to have a little bit more. Nowadays, we are facing another issue, which is childhood obesity and childhood diabetes, which has to do with other sets of factors, most of it lifestyle, and we can talk about it as well if you want, but that's a different aspect. What you're talking about is more that babies, when they're born, they tend to have a lot of fat reserves because they need to be protected, safety, protection, and insulation.
You mentioned that exercise, being more active, is a way to make your metabolism faster even as you grow older.
Yeah.
Any other ways to do that? So manipulating your diet in a certain direction?
I would think of it in two ways. The main way that we have, I talk a lot with my hands. You just have to get used to that. Nice. The main way that we have to manipulate our metabolism is our physical activity or exercise. And we can talk about the distinction of physical activity and exercise. But basically, your activity, this is the way that it is. The more you use your muscles, the more they contract. Muscle contraction needs energy. So that means that the energy that you're taking in the form of food is being utilized by your muscles. You don't store it. That's the way that you go. You can make adjustments with your diet. But I would say physical exercise, physical activity and exercise, definitely the main tool, the stronger tool that you have, and then adjustments with your diet, definitely. But I wouldn't think of diet as the main tool to change your metabolism.
Why do some people, and it's mostly men, gain weight in this visceral pattern when, for example, their legs are slim, but they have this beer belly? Why does that happen?
Yeah,
what does that depend on?
That's an interesting question as well, and also the target of a lot of intensive research. So what you're referring to is that we consider these two main types of obesity or fat accumulation. It doesn't have to be obesity, it could be just overweight. And that some people, and you're right, it's most commonly men, but some people tend to accumulate their fat in the visceral compartment. That means inside of your abdomen, surrounding your organs. And that pushes your belly forward and gives this what you're calling the beer belly. So it's like a protruding abdomen. Other people tend to accumulate their fat more instead of inside around your organs, in the subcutaneous, so under the skin. And that gives more of a, like around your buttocks and your thighs, which gives you more of a, it's what we call the apple shape versus the pear shape. So the apple shape being more the abdominal obesity that you're talking about, which is and the pear shape being more around your thighs and your buttocks. The interesting thing is that not only understanding why that happens, why is it that in certain cases the fat accumulation is in one location versus the other, but what is really more important actually is that one type of obesity is more associated with metabolic complications than the other. So if you tend to accumulate fat in the visceral compartment, you are more prone to develop other metabolic complications, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and so on. Whereas if you accumulate fat in your subcutaneous compartment, you are less prone to do that. And that's really interesting. And not only understanding why that happens, but what is the correlation? Why is it that putting your fat in one place doesn't seem to have as high cost in terms of disease as in the other place? There are theories about it, and nobody really knows. You're asking like the frontier of research in metabolism.
Is it true that you can expand your stomach by eating too much and thus require more food to feel full in the future?
Well, I mean, I am definitely not a specialist in gastroenterologist, but it's true that our stomach is quite plastic, right? It's also
Really?
It is plastic, and that's also the reason, that's exactly the basis for gastric bypass surgery, right? Is to make it smaller, make the stomach smaller so that the amount of food that you take in is smaller. That's one of the reasons. There are other related to the actual removal of certain tissues in the gastrointestinal tract, but the concept behind that surgery for obesity is to reduce the pouch that can accommodate food. So it's true in one direction and the other. But since it's not my areas of expertise, I'm not going to tell you how much can the stomach expand or not.
All right. What are the top 3 misconceptions that drive you crazy as a metabolism scientist?
Okay. The first thing that I think there's a lot of misinformation is the idea that certain types of exercise can get rid of certain types of fat. People always say, oh, I have localized fat. I have fat here or fat here or fat here. So I'm going to do that exercise, which gets specifically rid of that fat. And that's just not true. Like these aspects of energy metabolism that we're talking about, they are systemic. It's your whole body that makes decisions to spend the energy or use the energy. So if you have subcutaneous fat around your belly or your stomach, it's not because you do exercises in that location that particular fat is going to disappear. It's all controlled systemically. So that's one misconception. Then it depends what we were talking about. Certain people tend to accumulate fat more in certain places or not. So as you exercise, you will see that those places are the ones that respond faster, like your face, for example. If you're losing weight, your face is one of the places where you can tell faster, because this is a subcutaneous fat that will lose very fast. But it's not because a certain type of exercise makes a certain localization of fat disappear. The other thing that I'm not a very strong supporter is extremely restrictive diets, for example. We were just saying that nutrients they're calories, they have an energetic value, you need them to survive, but they also have a signaling. They are important messages, they're important signals. So when you adopt a restrictive diet that eliminates a certain group of nutrients, you are losing that caloric value, but you are also losing the messages that those nutrients would be informing your body. And certain of those messages we understand very well. We can immediately say, without this fatty acid, this will be the consequence. But other messages we don't understand at all. Sometimes these manifestations for a particular individual take decades to manifest, and they can be your mental health, they can be your immune system, they can be a variety of things that we just don't know. You see what I mean? We are very good at identifying the signals, We know exactly all the amino acids, all the fatty acids, but exactly all the roles that they play in your physiology, those are things that we're learning. That's why thing number 2 that I really don't like when people say, okay, I'm going to cut out of my diet completely this particular group. There's always a price to pay. We might not understand immediately what it is, but there's always a price to pay. You wanted 3.
Yeah.
What else? So it was the.
But I don't want to torture you. So
No.
if nothing else
Localized,
comes to your mind.
localized fat. The 2 restrictive diets. Well, I can't think of a specific one, but a general one is diets and exercise are very complicated issues, and there is always a tendency to believe that what resulted for me is the best. And this is a conversation that I've had many, many times when I teach, for example, the medical program, and some of these issues, some of these subjects, and the students really love it, I think, because it's something you can relate to, right? Nutrition, exercise, lifestyle, interventions, and whatnot. And there's always a group that comes after the lecture to say, but I've tried this particular combination and it's the best because it was the best for me. Just remember what we started talking about, inter-individual variability. What has resulted for you might not be good at all for the next person. And there is this tendency that, especially like in the media, to just advertise, I have tried this combination of exercise and diet. It was amazing for me. Therefore, this is the only way. So I'm going to push it onto everyone. It might not work for other people, you know. So that's something that I think we sometimes, people mean well. They want to pass on information that they think worked out fantastically for them, but it might not work out for another person. I always also bring up the subject that diets, for example, some diets are quite expensive. You know, if you're going to recommend a particular diet to somebody, just think very, very carefully. You know, how much does it cost? Does that person have the ability to purchase that, or make that diet, or make the ingredient, buy the ingredient? Some diets require that you eat every hour. Does that person have a job that allows them to stop and eat every hour? So you see what I mean? There's so many factors that have to do with your person, your genetics, your lifestyle, that I think it's often, we don't think as much as we should when we recommend an exercise intervention or protocol or a diet to a particular person. You have to think about, is this appropriate for this person? Can the person do it? Because otherwise it's useless, right? If I give you the best diet in the world, but you can't pay for it, or you don't have a lifestyle that allows you to adopt it, you're not going to do it. So it's not going to be useful at all. So yeah, I guess a general thing that I think a lot about.
I would ask him if there's any benefits in skipping breakfast in the morning.
Another tricky question. So the idea of skipping breakfast in the morning, I don't know if he was referring just to metabolism or to exercise. There are 2 aspects to this.
I see where you might come.
Yeah, there's 2 aspects to this. The purely metabolic aspect of it is, if you have a balanced, there's a lot of opinions about this. That's why I'm trying to be careful how I express myself. Because as you probably know, there are a lot of studies, finished and ongoing, that try to understand what is the benefit or the consequence of fasting. This is where this is going, right?
Yes. Exactly.
If you space out your meals, if you spend long periods of time without eating, and then concentrate all of your food in a particular period of time, if you actually skip meals during the week, if you reduce the food intake in one day and have, so there's a lot of combinations trying to find what is the best way to have a healthy metabolism. Not only in terms of weight gain, but thinking about all your metabolism, like your insulin sensitivity, your fatty acid profiles and whatnot. My opinion about these things is that the best way to do these things is what I call common sense diet. You have the meals that you have them, you know, in a reasonable way that provides the nutrition that you need without going overboard. And in that way, you can definitely have the traditional breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Now, what people are trying to find is a little bit like, can I optimize this? Or sometimes, can I afford to eat a lot now if I sacrifice not eating during the rest of the day? And that's where this idea is coming, that if you and I forget the numbers, if it's like concentrate all of your food intake in 8 hours per day. So during those consecutive 8 consecutive hours you can eat, but then the rest of the day you can't eat at all.
So the intermittent fasting.
Yes, and other people say, well, on a Monday you only eat 500 calories, and then on a Tuesday you can eat, and then on a Wednesday, and so there's a lot of these different ideas. To me, they are only shortcuts to try to avoid what I think is the common sense diet. And this is my informed but personal opinion. You see what I mean? If we are able to eat at each one of the meals a balanced, reasonable amount of food, qualitatively and quantitatively, I think we're fine. The problem is that we have more and more availability of foods that are very calorically rich and that are very appetizing. So we want to be able to eat them. So it becomes very hard to make these common sense choices at breakfast and at lunch and at dinner. So people try to find other ways to go about it. And that is skipping breakfast, for example. So that basically one imagines you have dinner at, I don't know, 5 p.m., 6 p.m., depends on the culture. And then you spend all of those hours, including your sleep, that you don't eat. So you're going to eat again at lunch. So you have a long period of fasting. Like periods of fasting, what they do is that our bodies are not very good at storing sugar. We have some capacity to store glucose, but not very high. We're much better at storing fat, which means that if you're going to fasting, you're going to use your sugar very fast, and then you have to burn your fat. That's why we're going with this. I think, once again, I think you have to think very carefully about your lifestyle. What kind of job do you have? Some people react okay to being hungry from an emotional perspective, from an anxiety perspective, from a mood. Other people don't react well at all. So I don't really favor these more extreme options, but you will for sure talk to people that will tell you, I have tried the intermittent fasting and it works wonders for me. And I mean, in the end, what I always say is, in terms of diets and exercise, you know yourself better than anyone else. So if you take the calm and the time to think, what am I doing? Is this reasonable? Am I doing something extreme? And if you find the right recipe for you, that's fine. That's fine, As long as you don't go into extremes, I think. If we take the calm and the time to figure out what is best for us, I think every person knows how your body responds better to these things, for sure.
So it seems like you are the supporter of intuitive eating.
And
So
exercise
eating
as well.
whenever you're hungry, as much as you need.
Not as much as you need. That's exactly what I was saying. When I was saying to make reasonable, common sense decisions about what a meal is, that's exactly what I was saying. That we intuitively know what a reasonable meal is, right? Sometimes you really like that food, so you go for seconds, or you go, see what I mean? But we know, and you also throughout your life, you know how much food intake results in more weight gain or more weight loss. We all know this. It's just a question of, are we in a place in our lives that we can do that? Or are we stressed? Or are we anxious? Or are we too busy? Or, see what I mean? I think that's what I meant when I said to have the calm and give it time to understand exactly what kind of exercise do I like, what kind of exercise do I respond better to, what is the exercise that I don't give up on, and the diet's the same. If you say, I'm going to eliminate carbohydrates completely from my diet, for almost any human being, that will result in weight loss. But what's the price to pay? There is, again, the same idea. Carbohydrates and fatty acids have a positive reward in our brains that is linked with mood, is linked with anxiety. So there's a lot of integration in our brains. There's a lot of integration between food intake and positive, what is called hedonistic signals, which make you feel good. So if you sacrifice that part of your food intake, are you also sacrificing something else? And I think very often people forget about mental health, about these issues. When you're these things are very connected. If you think again from an evolutionary perspective, like food intake and rich calorically rich foods, your brain evolved to give you positive rewards when you take those, because from an evolutionary perspective, If you have more calories, you could run faster, you were stronger, you would survive the long winter. So there's a very, very strong connection between certain food intake, especially fat and sugar, and positive rewards in your brain. And that positive reward is also connected to mood. It's anxiety, it's stress, it's fear, it's angst, it's happiness. So I would be very, very cautious when we make these very strong or radical choices about removing a certain thing or adding a certain thing, because I do think that in the long run there's a price to pay. Not to repeat myself, but I do think so.
So you don't support diets in general?
I think that smart diets make small reductions in some of these compartments so that they are sustainable over time, so that your body has time to adapt to that small change. You see what I mean? Don't remove carbohydrates completely, reduce it. Don't remove fat completely, reduce it. And this is why, I mean, if you're going to do it by yourself, the smaller change you can start, the better, the healthier. But of course, you should talk to a health professional when you're going to do these things, because it involves so many things. So it's not that I don't support diets, either for weight gain or weight loss. It's just that I think they should be done in a smart way. Usually, what we want is to achieve the results as fast as possible, right? And to do that, that means a rapid reduction in something, or a very dramatic reduction in something.
Mm.
And this is where I think problems come from. First of all is what I just said repeatedly. We don't really understand completely what the lack or the surplus of a certain nutrient causes to all of your body. But your body also adapts immediately, right? If you reduce your food intake drastically, your metabolism reduces as well. Because your body, evolution, there's no food, I'm going to try to spend less energy to conserve the one that I have. So if you do it slowly and gradually, then you have less of this fast response in slowing down your metabolism.
Maybe you're less likely to give up.
And maybe you're less likely to give up because it's something that it's not very dramatic, you know. And you also know, like, if you really, really like just start cutting away slowly the thing that you think you're more comfortable with. Don't throw away the one that you really, really like, because it's less likely that you stick with it.
Mm-hmm.
These are not easy problems to solve. We've been trying to solve these problems for decades, right? We are now through what everybody considers an epidemic of obesity that comes with diabetes, cardiovascular disease, mental health disorders. I mean, living with obesity or being overweight is now formally accepted to be a risk factor for cancer, for neurodegenerative diseases, for immune diseases, for a variety of things. So it's not just a fact of carrying more adipose tissue or less adipose tissue. It's what is the consequence for your body, what is the consequence for your health long term, and we still don't have a good answer for it. Were you expecting to get final answers on all of your all your questions?
No, because I'm in science as well, so I know that that's not attainable.
No, I think this was with these interviews, there's always this expectation that finally somebody's going to tell you what to eat, when to eat.
Magic tool to...
Yes, how much to eat, how much to exercise, when to exercise. We just don't know. We don't know. And this is why when you ask me what are the 3 things that sometimes, I understand that people do it sometimes from a good place, sometimes for commercial purposes. They want to push up a certain, and I think it's very misleading, you know, because if that magic recipe, you try it, it doesn't work, it just causes even more frustration and anxiety, because you think, I'm trying really hard and nothing works. It's not nothing works. Maybe that didn't work for you because your body is just not designed in the same way as that other person. And if we would take the time to understand and cater and design things for you, maybe it would work. So I fear that sometimes those small messages, they do more harm than good. And I don't want to contribute to that. So that's why I'm careful when I express myself to say, we don't know, we think it's like this, and so on.
That's why we have this interview.
Good. It's a good initiative.
Another question that implies a magic tool answer. So is there a particular type of exercise that works best for weight loss?
Yeah.
For that particular purpose?
Yes. So, I mean, on average, that one we can actually, on average, aerobic exercise works better for weight loss. So the big divisions that we usually refer to is endurance, and that refers to aerobic. That means what people call cardio. That means jogging, biking, swimming, running around. And then what we call resistance exercise, that is more weightlifting. So, and sometimes people that are used to talking about endurance, they think about that as resistance, but we usually divide like this: endurance, that's cardio, aerobic; resistance, that's weightlifting. On average, aerobic exercise gives faster results for weight loss. It's also something that offers a great variety. You know, you can do jogging if that's your thing. You can swim, you can bike. So, and that is something that is that offers, on average, best results. Now, again, the same idea. You know yourself best. You know, and if for anyone that has ever tried to start an exercise program, you know if you respond better to the resistance or to the aerobic. You know, this again, our bodies are just designed in different ways. Our genetics is different. I know, for example, for myself, if I stop exercising and then I go back, I very, very quickly regain my performance on the cardiovascular, on the aerobic, and it takes me forever for the resistance, which I also don't like a lot. So it's, you see what I mean? Like for a weight loss program, which is something that is tough to do, and you really want to do it consistently for a long period of time, I think it's fundamental to choose the thing that you like or that you dislike the least, because not everybody likes exercise. So, but I would say aerobic, not a particular like running, biking, but aerobic exercise in general.
What are the top 5 foods on your blacklist?
Foods.
Yes.
I don't have any. Again, the same.
No cakes, no,
No.
French fries.
No, I don't have any. Literally, I'm trying to think, to be completely honest. There are certain things that I try not to base my meals on, but it's not that I don't eat them. I eat anything. I do sometimes think, is it worth the calorie? You know, because we are just offered food so often and so many times, and it's become part of our culture. You have a stop for a coffee and a cake, and you have your lunch, and then you have this and that. And sometimes I think, do I actually want this? So I'm not a very cake person. I like savory foods a lot, much more than sweets. So sometimes I will skip a dessert because it just, you know, I don't have to have it. But there is nothing that I would say, oh, that I just don't eat. I just try to, like, if I have a meal, I don't base it on carbohydrates, but I have carbohydrates in there, you know. I try to put more and more greens, you know, because we know that that's healthy for you for a variety of reasons, but no blacklisted foods at all. I love fries.
As I scroll through social media, I see some trends. And so, talking about these foods that are popular on social media, every Instagram diva fries her pancakes on coconut oil. Is it actually better than the other oil?
Okay, so I mean, I have never studied
Coconut oil?
a proper comparative study side by side to be able to tell you from a scientific perspective that this combination of pancake and oil is the best. But I will tell you that the large majority of those messages that avocado makes you go into ketosis and things like that, they're not true. They're just not true, you know. But there's a lot of that. I don't go down those rabbit holes because I get super aggravated. But the avocado one is everywhere, right? Oh, eat an avocado. It's a ketotic. No, it isn't.
Yeah,
I mean, for you to go,
avocado is something very trendy.
it's delicious. It's delicious, and it's. I love avocados. It's a great food, but it's not the thing that is going to solve your problems, you know. And definitely these messages of lemon and popcorn are just this. I would try to ignore. I think if you are on a mission to put on weight or lose weight, the best way is to talk to a health professional, because they will help you understand these things. They will help you understand which combinations of foods are indeed useful for a particular purpose. I would definitely not go on, you know, any random channel just to find out if the coconut oil pancake is the is the best combination.
So you're not a supporter of detox juices?
Oh God, sorry. No. But you know what? There are certain things that if it makes you feel well, those things are not going to hurt you. You know, they're not going to hurt you. So if it makes you feel well, by all means, it's fine. I think there's a level of mind over body that, you know, not to be too crunchy granola, but there's a level of mind over body that I fully accept, which is if there is a certain thing, a certain habit that is healthy, that makes you feel well, like taking juices, going for a swim in cold water, I'm a full supporter. I think you should do it. But to really be able to say that this is linked to a specific therapeutic effect, then I think we need more information. I'm not saying that there aren't therapeutically useful compounds in nature. It's just that usually the amounts of those compounds in the fruits and juices is just so low that we have to first identify what it is so that we can produce it in an amount that has a therapeutic effect.
Let's move into the sugar topic.
Mhm.
It's a big one.
Mhm.
So first of all, let's go through the basics. Is sugar an enemy? Should we cut added sugars off completely?
I think what has happened is that, again, I go back to my main message, which is all nutrients are necessary. All nutrients are necessary, and that includes carbohydrates and fatty acids and amino acids, proteins. We have, over the years, the decades, the centuries maybe, for a variety of reasons, started using more and more and more and more sugar, more and more and more salt. No, it's not only sugar, right? And it had to do with the fact of conserving foods or making them more appetizing, or at a time where we did not have access to foods back in the day, that we didn't have access to foods that were very nutritious or high in calories, adding sugar was an easy way. That's not true anymore. But as a society, we have grown accustomed to having a lot of sugar in a lot of things. So I don't think that sugar is the enemy, but the levels of sugar that we have grown accustomed to use are way, 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 way above what we actually need. Was that a good, satisfactory answer?
Yes.
You see
So
what I
there's
mean?
no need
There's
to
no
cut
need.
them off.
There's no need. There's no need. I think, again, go back to the common sense. I mean, you probably know if that particular juice or food or drink needs added sugar, or if it's fine as it is. These are things that you can get used to. I grew up having sugar in, like I'm drinking coffee, and it has not just coffee, no sugar. But when I was growing up, every single drink that we had, milk, or we added sugar because it was just the way it was, you know.
Mm.
And as you grow up, you start thinking about it like, okay, do I actually need to add 2 spoons of sugar? How about I add 1? Do I actually need to add sugar? And nowadays, tea and coffee, I don't like milk, but I drink them without any sugar at all.
Mm.
So that, I think you can also reduce things.
What makes us crave sweet food and how to reduce that?
It's again that conversation we were having, that certain nutrients like fatty acids and sugars, they have a positive reward impact on your brain, and that has to do with this evolutionary pressure for you to seek and ingest foods that were of high nutrition, because that would sustain you for longer. So, and again, going back to the same, right? Adding them has this positive reward in your brain, so you feel better. You feel, you know, there's a positive reward to it. So there is the risk, as in anything else, to go into more. But cutting them out completely, there's also the risk in terms of, okay, now that signal is absent. So that could cause anxiety. That could cause, you know, depressive behaviors and things like that. That's why I always, you know, I know it's difficult, but stay in the middle. That's the best.
Mm. So if you eat too much sugar and then you try to avoid it, you might have like the dampened reward
Exactly.
response in your brain.
Especially if you're talking about very
even
drastic.
though you're eating normal.
If you're talking about these drastic cuts, right? Like all of a sudden, I mean, that is true for almost anything that we are used to consume, like caffeine is true as well, for sugar it's true as well. So if you're going to make those changes, I would suggest to make them gradually until you reach a point that you're satisfied with.
So is it sensible to replace sugar with substituents like fructose, stevia, and so on?
So I don't know if you've been following the news, but although for the longest time, so fructose is lipsetrate. Let's go into the
yeah, that's more interesting actually, because sugar is fructose plus glucose, right? So fructose is basically more or less the same
part
thing, isn't
part of the sugar. It's not the
it?
same.
Like you're doing more or less the same thing to your body in terms of insulin signaling and so on,
so
or
it's
no?
not. It's not. It's not. These
No.
are two molecules that, although they are in the same family, but the idea of signals, they signal to the body very differently. Now, what you're talking about is that as we usually eat sugar from nature, they are combined 1-on-1, right? So you get them in kind of almost equal ratio, 1-to-1. Then, due to technological developments, people started separating them and using only fructose, or only glucose is less common. And that has additional complications. But you were talking about these more artificial sugar substitutes, which for the longest time people were kind of, the idea was that they were okay, but more and more information is coming out that they might send the wrong signals to your body as well, which doesn't shock me because of the same idea, you know. It's a chemical, it's a substance, it's a compound that you're ingesting into your body, and it doesn't have the same caloric value as glucose. So from that particular aspect, we're fine. It's sweet, but it doesn't give you the calories. But it's still a chemical that goes into our complex physiology with all that inter-individual variability that I was talking about, into all of these that we don't really understand at the molecular defined level how everything works. And then you throw a piece in there that you say, it's going to be okay. So the fact that it might not be okay, to me, it's not shocking. So all of these replacements, and then it also has to do with how much of it do you actually take. But there's more and more scientific news coming out that maybe those things are not as safe as we thought they were. Fructose, I think there's been a lot of discussions about fructose because of this high fructose corn syrup that has been used as a sweetener in food industry, I guess, to make foods sweeter in general. And then the problem is that you're taking in an amount of fructose just by itself that usually you would never get, you know. And the name sometimes is misleading because people then create this thing that eating fruit is unhealthy and that you shouldn't eat fruit, which is wrong. Fructose is just one type of sugar that has the name fructose because it does exist in fruit. And the problem is when you take it into this high concentration, high amounts. And even that, people have argued for years. Is this the cause of modern incidence of obesity? And nobody agrees. There's so many different factors in here that it's been difficult to just pinpoint the factor. And maybe it isn't a factor. It's a combination of different.
So the chemical nature of those substituents, like maltose, stevia, and so on, it's completely different from.
Yeah, so some of them are not even sugars. Some of them are amino acids and different compounds. The search was, I've never participated in that search, but I think the rationale behind finding those sugar replacements were to find substances that are sweet, but they don't carry the same energy value as glucose or fructose, and some of them are like I said amino acids, constituents of proteins, right? So they're an amino acid. They have a sweet flavor, so we add it to the drink or whatever. That's what's been. So they can be very different compounds, actually.
I see.
My question is being vegan is healthy?
I mean, come on. We have a whole world to look at. There's lots. There's entire societies that have vegan food intake habits. The only thing that I usually advise is that you have to be maybe more aware of what you're eating, and if you indeed are choosing foods that give you the whole coverage of nutrients that you need. So especially when you're growing, you just have to be very aware. Do these foods that I'm choosing, do they have all the right vitamins that I need, the right nutrients, so that you don't go into a situation, because the choices are just harder, right? Especially if you're getting into it, especially if you're depending on somebody preparing food for you. As you get into it, just be aware of, do I get everything that I need from the foods that I choose? And try to introduce as much variety as you can into those food options. And this applies to anything, vegan, vegetarian, any kind of, if you're going to make some kind of, go back to the same idea. If you're going to have a diet that is restrictive for whatever reason, that can be a vegan diet, just be very, very aware. try to inform yourself as much as you can so that you understand I might need a supplement for a particular vitamin. That find a food that has that particular vitamin. Yeah, no problem there.
So it's possible to gain all these nutrients without eating any animals.
Yeah, I mean, like look at
products.
India. India has been doing it in other countries, I'm sure, for so that's not a problem. But it's. I think sometimes the difference is that if you are born in a culture where that has been the standard, the norm for a long time, families know, your environment know what to eat and what not to eat in a way, so that if we now try to do it a little bit dissociated from that culture, sometimes we need to be even more aware because you don't have your mom or dad or cousin or whatever that says eat this and that and that. So then we have to search for the information ourselves so that we know that we are getting all the nutrients that we need. That's what I meant.
Are the proteins that come from animals and plants the same or different?
Well, I mean, they're different. There are certain proteins that don't exist in one realm versus the other. Now, remember that once you eat them, in your stomach, they are broken down to amino acids. The protein, see what I mean? So they are broken down into their constituents. So in a way, there might be certain compounds, certain supplements, certain factors that exist more in the animal kingdom than in the plant kingdom. And once again, you just have to be aware if there's something that it's missing in the plant kingdom, that you might have access to it in some other form. But it doesn't really matter. This is something like people say, oh, I'm going to eat collagen because collagen is really good for my skin. When your skin sees the collagen that you ate, it's no longer collagen, right? It's been broken down in your stomach and it goes through your gastrointestinal tract and it gets absorbed as blocks that your body then puts together as whatever. So yeah, the actual proteins doesn't matter so much. It's more like all the building blocks, are they there or not? But there are differences, of course, between the constituents in the plant and the constituents in an animal.
So the collagen supplements are not as valid
for that particular purpose. I mean, yeah, well, I mean, in the end, they're breaking down to amino acids again, right? Once you take them it goes into your acid environment in your stomach with all the enzymes, and they get just broken down into components that your body will take up if necessary. If not necessary, we'll let them go and use them to build whatever. It doesn't mean that you take collagen to rebuild collagen again. It's like Lego. It's literally like Lego. You can have a castle that is made of Lego with all different colors and pieces, and then you eat it. And your body puts it apart, breaks it apart into all the different separate Lego pieces. And then your body is going to look at those pieces and say, oh, I need this piece over here and this piece over there. So you're not going to rebuild the castle again. Do you see what I mean?
Yep.
Once you break it down, it'll be useful, but bodies will take it to build whatever they want. Like, give a castle of Lego to a child, break it down, and see what they will never or almost never put the castle back again.
I think first of all, I would ask how his research affects himself, and how the things he found out or she found out, affect his daily life.
That's a really good question.
Yeah. So did you start hyper-analyzing the stuff that you eat? And
that's a really good question. It's a very thoughtful question as well.
Overthinking.
It's a very thoughtful question. People usually don't ask. They ask things for themselves. So that's very cute. I mean, there are two parts of this. The one part is people expect that because you research in exercise physiology that you exercise a lot, and that's unfortunately not true. That's unfortunately not true. On the one side, I particularly came to this research area not from the exercise angle, but from a more basic knowledge angle. So I became very interested in understanding how cells and tissues adapt to different things that could be cold, fever, infection, exercise, diabetes. So what I became interested in is how does a cell and the tissue where it is and the organ there it is and the organism where it is, how do they adapt, and what kind of messages are exchanged between cells and tissues and organs to make sure that the whole organism adapts. And exercise is amazing for that because it's a whole body adaptation. So that's why we use a lot of exercise. It's not because I come from the exercise field myself. And that's why we use a lot of this, not only because of the therapeutic effect of exercise, that we want to understand how does it work, can we make therapies out of it, but it is an amazing intervention from a purely scientific perspective to understand how your muscles have to adapt, but your heart has to adapt, your lungs, your brain, everything has to go together. And so it's a good system to study. We have found over the years in the lab quite unexpected things in terms of how we thought that things were going to work and how actually they worked in the end, that have made me sometimes take a step back in how we think about problems, for example. So not so much, I think she was going more to how have I adapted things into my lifestyle, right? But in terms of the science and the way that we look at problems, we sometimes get answers that are so different from what we thought we were looking for that it really changes the way that you face the next problem. So in that sense, it has changed the way that I think about things just because of that. But I'm thinking about I think maybe one of the most important findings that we have done in the lab over the years was this understanding how exercise affects mental health, that we published already a few years ago, and it's something that I care a lot about, and it's a question that has been standing for decades. We know that exercise is very good for mental health, for different types of mental health disorders, but the question was why? And we found one of the mechanisms. It doesn't mean that it's the only, but it was a very unexpected mechanism. Everybody was thinking, and we were as well, that we were going to find that as you exercise, your muscle releases different kinds of substances, and we were going to find something that would go to your brain and have a positive effect. And then we found exactly the opposite. We found that as you exercise, your muscles remove from circulation something that is bad for your brain. And that was really surprising, and it took us the longest time. So this is it's actually a compound that results for breaking down a particular naturally occurring amino acid called tryptophan. So there's of the many amino acids, one is called tryptophan, and it's an amino acid that your body actually uses to make serotonin, which I'm sure you've heard about, which is a positive regulator of mood. It makes you happy. And after serotonin, you have another molecule that comes from the same called melatonin, which regulates sleep patterns. But this amino acid, there's only a very small amount of this amino acid that goes to produce these substances. A lot of it goes to produce another substance called NAD+. But on the way to producing NAD+ from tryptophan, you can get stuck in certain parts of the pathway. And if you're very stressed, or if you have a lot of inflammatory signals in your body, you can actually get stuck in a particular place, and you produce something called kynurenine. This is the name of the substance. And this kynurenine, although it can be produced in your liver, in your immune cells, in all of your body, it can actually cross what we call the blood-brain barrier. So it can cross from the rest of your body into your brain. And if it accumulates in your brain, which has been seen to happen in people with depression or bipolar disorders or certain, that compound can cause damage to your brain, to not go into more specifics. And what we found is that if you are trained, so now we're talking about exercise, not physical activity, actual structured, repetitive, performance-enhancing exercise.
So not walking.
Not walking. So then we're talking about
weights, for example.
we're talking about what the study that we have done is all on the aerobics, so I can't tell you so much on the weightlifting, but definitely cardio, running, biking, swimming in a structured way. Your muscles acquire this capacity to remove kynurenine from circulation and change it into something else that can no longer go to your brain. So that was really, and that, on the one way, it was quite unexpected, because it's as if all of a sudden, I've said this once before, that your muscles become a little bit like a kidney or a liver, which are the organs that we are used to looking at as detoxification organs. So now if you have trained muscle, and remember that muscle is 40% of your body mass, it's almost half of your body. So now you have this gigantic filter that is activated by exercise training that prevents these toxics to be in circulation and eventually in your brain. And who knows, we continue to try to find what else do these things do, what other biology do they have, and they move them to a place that they don't do harm. So on the one side, it was the scientific aspect of, we thought it was going to be like release of a positive factor. It turns out to be the removal of a negative factor. but also for my own life. Like, I mean, we all work really hard and we have tough schedules, you know, and we have lives where we are constantly being pulled in different directions. It's the teaching, the research, the project application, the project reporting, the mentoring. There's a lot in our lives, and that level of stress can become a little bit too much in a way. So that was kind of, for me, an alert for some easy solutions that you have with a scientific basis that you could help your own mental health. So to try to incorporate more exercise into your life, to try to not only from the bioenergetic perspective that we were talking about, you know, like metabolically healthy, control your weight, be stronger, but also from your mental health perspective.
What are the consequences of not drinking enough water each day?
This is one of those questions that, again, I think at a certain point, it became trendy to drink water all the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're supposed to drink like 1.5 liters or 2.
Yeah,
a
something
day.
like
Is
that. Something like that.
the
I mean,
dogma?
yes, and I think, I mean, there was a esteemed professor in our department that used to get super agitated with this trend of just drinking water and water and water. And I mean, this water intake, maybe even more than food intake, it's extremely well controlled by our bodies. So unless you are in a situation where you don't have access, you know, you will drink. So this trend of carrying a bottle of water around and drinking all the time, there's no need for that. If, again, go back to the same, if it makes you happy and you feel great, that's okay. But you are usually not going to go into dehydration if you have a normal lifestyle that you have access to. Now, if you take it again to the extreme, and of course, consequences of dehydration are extremely severe. If you wouldn't drink water at all, then you're talking about not only well-being, but life compromising. But I don't think that was the question, right? It was, if you don't drink that, water intake is very well controlled. Thirst is very well controlled. You will seek water if you are in the situation where your electrolyte imbalance is in case yeah.
So, for example, if you drink 1 liter of water a day instead of 2 or 1.5, is that gonna end up in some bad
If
way
you would
for you?
if you would force yourself, like, so the amount of water that you actually need per day depends on a lot of factors, as I'm sure you will understand.
So it's not
right?
necessarily that amount
Exactly,
that is
exactly.
postulated for everyone.
Exactly.
Someone might need less than
Absolutely, absolutely. And what I'm
see.
saying is that it's so well controlled by your physiology that if you need more, you will be very thirsty. And unless you are limiting yourself consciously to not drink, you will search for that water. See what I mean? Food intake has is more complicated. Food intake has more components of anxiety, fear. We were talking about emotions. There's loads of other things. Thirst is very, very, very well controlled. So if you need more water because there's an imbalance, you will search for that water. So you don't need to force yourself to constantly drink water. Water is great. So if it makes you happy to carry a bottle and drink all the time, that's super duper. But it's not. You should be afraid that you're going to be dehydrated if you don't hit that particular mark per day.
As a metabolism scientist, what would you say are the top 5 things to lose weight?
The 5 top things to lose weight. So
Or
I
3.
would yeah. So I think taking into consideration of what we have been discussing, that individuals are different and they react differently to both variations in the amount of energy that we take in and variations in the amount of energy that we spend. Because in the end, from a physics perspective, it is really energy in, energy out, right? So if you are on an energy deficit, then you are prone to lose weight. And if you have an energy surplus, you are prone to gain weight. This is going to vary from person to person. And the combination and the severity of weight, of caloric restriction and energy output is going to change. But I would say that the most important thing is to make sure that you increase your energy output and you slightly decrease your energy input. The combination of both. And then you have accessory effects, like make sure that what you do, if you're going to do this for real, make sure that you have good advice from somebody that knows what is healthy for that situation. Try and see if this is something that you can commit to and sustain, because this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. as they say, right? It's something that you want to continue. You want it to become your lifestyle. You don't want to do it for a month and then go back to something else. So think about long term, think about small changes, and play with both. Energy output, that means physical activity and exercise. Energy input, that means food intake. So you can play with those two things. So for me, the most important is tailor it to yourself, get good advice, and don't go into extremes. Can it be 3 instead of 5?
Yes. This will probably be the last one. What are your thoughts on the supplements?
Oof, can I leave now? Supplements. Okay, this is it's a very, very tricky question, but a very important one. I think the most important is that I think in the search for rapid responses, and those can be increasing your performance, growing bigger muscles, losing weight, putting on weight, people find that everybody tries to find the shortcut. And sometimes it's what we were talking about, like that diet that somebody said, this is the one. Sometimes it's going to be the juice that somebody said, this is the one. Sometimes it's going to be the supplement. Supplements is something that in many countries is not as regulated or regulated. The production and the quality control is not as regulated as a medication, for sure. Which means, but they are still, we go back to the same thing that I've said over. They're nutrients, but they are signals, you know. So all of a sudden, without really understanding exactly what and why, you are offering your body an enormous amount of, let's take tryptophan as an example, our kynurenine producing amino acid, right? This is very common. Tryptophan is called an essential amino acid, which means that our body cannot produce it. So you have to take it from the diet. There are certain amino acids that we can make ourselves, but some we cannot. Tryptophan is a good example. You have to take it from the diet. So there is this belief, and people have been doing this for a long time. Since tryptophan is used to make serotonin, which is a hormone that makes you feel motivated and well, some people would take additional tryptophan with this intent. Let me boost our mood by taking tryptophan. Tryptophan is also fundamental to make proteins, and proteins are the building blocks of your muscle. So if you're trying to grow more muscle, you don't want tryptophan to be a limiting factor because we cannot make it. So people would take supplements of tryptophan to help grow bigger muscles. Now, remember what I just told you a while ago? 95% of the tryptophan that comes into your body is not used to make serotonin or melatonin or protein synthesis. Protein synthesis is like 1%. 95% of it is broken down through these compounds that we were talking about, that depending on your physiology, your state, your stress levels, your inflammation, can produce things that are bad for your mental health. Now you see the problem? We have people taking supplements of tryptophan because they think, I'm exercising a lot, I'm doing a lot of weightlifting, I want to feel better, I want to be motivated, so I take this amino acid and my body is going to take it and make serotonin, which makes me feel motivated and well, and it's going to build protein. So, ta-da, 95% of it, the majority of the tryptophan could go into a very, very bad place. Producing, for example, this kynurenine compound that I just told you is related to anxiety and depression. So, and this is one example of a large number of people taking supplements for things that we appreciate they can be used to, but we have no idea if our body is going to make that choice. That's the problem I have with supplements. Production, quality control, meaning when you buy a bottle of X, is it really just that? Or is it something else? Is it the amount that is written on the bottle? There have been stories, I mean, there are quite many, not many, but some occasions where since the production of these supplements is not to the, sometimes or often, not to the same degree of control as other medication, contaminations with other things that could be bad for you. So, and the other aspect is, if you have a balanced diet where you have access to all the nutrients, you often don't need these supplements. We live in a society, most of us, not everybody, where you can have access to your greens and your proteins and your fatty acids and your sugars. And your body is pretty efficient at choosing the ones that it needs to make more muscle and whatnot. It doesn't need supplementation of this and that. So it's dangerous. And I think people don't appreciate that sometimes it's going to take 10 years for that negative effect to manifest itself. And if it has to do with mental health, those are really, really tough things to solve, you know. So I think it's too risky. We don't understand enough of the effects of these single supplements to say, go ahead, take loads of tryptophan, it'll be good for you. Maybe your body will make a choice that is not the one that you were thinking about. So I am not a super fan of those supplements unless they are prescribed by a health professional. If it is your physician that is prescribing a particular vitamin, or if you have a deficiency in a particular mineral, absolutely. I was referring more to the self-medication or self-prescription of supplements.
Hey guys, this was my first Ask an Expert interview. So if you liked it, give it a like, follow this channel, and let me know who I should interview next in the comments. Bye!